What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you my game picks and predictions as we head into week number 10 of the 2024 college football season. Going back to my picks and predictions from last week in week number 9, my overall record was 9-1, so I got 9 out of the 10 games right and then just one game wrong, so I had my best weekend of college football at picking games and also giving you predictions for those games as well. Last weekend was kind of a quiet week. This week, I think we have an exciting weekend of college football, basically to kick off the month of November. So I picked 10 of the biggest games in my opinion, and I'm going to give you score predictions for all these games. And my record now going into this weekend is now 58-34. So that's what my record looks like as we head into the first weekend of the month of November of this college football season. So let's go ahead and get right into my predictions here for week number 10. And we start here with the big one. It's Ohio State versus Penn State at noon Eastern time on Fox. So this is the big noon kickoff on Fox. Ohio State favored by 3.5, and the over and under sitting at 45.5. Not a lot of points are being expected in this game. You got two top 5 teams here going at it, the biggest game of the weekend. This is the biggest game of the weekend, in the Big Ten ever since the Ohio State and Oregon game. I think this one might be much more bigger, but this is a Penn State team that's been desperate to beat Ohio State, of course, in the years and everything. Ohio State's really dominated the series as of late. Last year, the Buckeyes, Penn State did come close to beating Ohio State, but just could not move the football in the Ohio State defense. It was 20-12 last year. I think this one's going to be a dogfight. It's going to be a back-and-forth defensive battle, I should believe. And, the over and under is at 45.5, so we're not expecting both offenses to be very explosive. You got two teams that are pretty similar from last week's games. They did not really play that well against their opponents. They definitely overlooked their opponents, and they were just focused on this game. I think both teams come out really fired up, and I think Penn State's going to be more fired up because they got the home field advantage, the whiteout and everything. It's one of the toughest places to play in the Big Ten. But, Ohio State, I think, is definitely just a slightly more talented team than Penn State is. I think Penn State does everything they can to pull off the upset, but I'm actually going to go with Ohio State here. I got the Buckeyes winning this one 24-21, so a really close game here, but I got to go with the Buckeyes in this one. A turnover probably changes the difference. I think first half it will be a low-scoring type game, but then offensively I think some team will kind of get going, and maybe Penn State kind of jumps out to a big lead, but then Ohio State maybe comes back from behind. But I kind of expect maybe a game-winning field goal probably could be the difference, or maybe a turnover, because, turnovers are going to be really a big key in this game. It's really going to come down to both defensive teams and see who has the better offense. But got to go with the Buckeyes here, 24-21. I think they go on the road and beat Penn State here, 24-21. Next up, we got Duke versus Miami. This one is also at noon Eastern time on ABC. Miami favored by 21.5. That's a very high spread there. And looking at the over and under, it's at 54.5. You got Miami coming in undefeated at 8-0. They're coming off a solid performance against Florida State. That was a close game in the first half against their rival, but then the second half, Miami just kind of pulled away from there, and that game wasn't even close. Duke almost last week, pulled off a huge upset against SMU. They lost this game like 28-27. And in my opinion, the Blue Devils have been a very big surprise. They probably don't miss Mike Oko that much. It seems like they have a pretty bright future. This roster is not really too bad. It's not really the same roster as Mike Oko had, but this is a pretty solid 6-2 Duke team. So I think Duke's going to put up a decent fight here in this game, but Miami just overall the better team here. I think Miami, the way they played this year, and Cam Ward's experience at the quarterback, he's going to get better as the season goes along here the rest of the way. And I think Miami wins this one. Like I said, Duke puts up a decent fight, let's say, in the first half. But Miami does pull away and they win this one, not by much, only by 18, 38-20. It still is a big win for them, but like I said, I think the Blue Devils will put up a big fight there in the first half, but I got to go with Miami here in this one. They're definitely just more of the talented team, and Miami wins 38-20. All right, my third game here, Ole Miss at Arkansas, another noon game here, this time on ESPN. Rebels favored by 7 in this one, so by about a touchdown, and the over and under is at 53.5. You got Ole Miss coming out of a bye week a couple weeks ago. They defeated Oklahoma, took on a pretty solid Oklahoma defense last week. You got to wonder if the offense is kind of a little bit of beat up, from after that game against the Sooners, but I don't really think so. I think Ole Miss will be ready to go in this one. You got Arkansas, though. That's a pretty solid 5-3 team. Another chance here for Arkansas to actually pull off the upset. They've taken on like a lot of top 25 teams this year. Oklahoma State was a top 10 team, but that team didn't really turn out to be good. And Arkansas has taken on LSU and Tennessee. They beat Tennessee back on October 5th, but a couple weeks ago they did lose to LSU. It was not even a close game whatsoever. The defense for LSU just came out there and played solid defense. Arkansas's got a pretty good offense. They dominated Mississippi State. Mississippi State's one of the worst teams in the SEC, though. This would definitely be a tougher test here for Arkansas, but we've seen some really good matchups here in the past between the Rebels and the Razorbacks. I think this is a game that can go either way. I don't think both rosters are even. I think Ole Miss definitely has a more talented roster, and they also have a improved defense, but I think, Arkansas will come out. They'll score some points on this Ole Miss team. I think this game turns into a bit of a shootout. I know the over and under is only just at 53.5, but got to go with a shootout here, and I'm going to go with the upset. I think Arkansas pulls off the upset here. They get it done over Ole Miss. Now in the preseason, I did pick Ole Miss to win this game, but I'm actually going to change my pick here. Arkansas, a very solid team. They're going to come out really fired up in this one. And usually when you get to the month of November, this is where the upsets start to happen. So I got to go with Arkansas here to pull off the upset, 34-31. And this game was in my upset alert video from yesterday. So yeah, definitely keep an eye on this one if you're either an Arkansas fan or maybe like a college football fan in general. Next up, we got Oregon at Michigan, 3:30 Eastern Time on CBS. So this will be the 3:30 CBS kickoff. The Ducks are favored by 14.5, and the over and under is sitting at 45.5. So kind of similar to the Penn State and Ohio State game. Not a lot of points are expected in this game. You got Oregon that's coming in undefeated to start out the month of November. This is the best team in the country as of right now. They're coming off a really big win against Illinois last week, 38-9. But, Oregon did not play that well in the second half against Illinois. I kind of wonder what was the deal there for the Ducks, but it was still like a big win either way. Looking at Michigan, they're coming off a very physical rivalry game against Michigan State. They were really lucky to get that win. They get the home field advantage in this game against Oregon. I'm kind of surprised that Michigan kind of didn't overlook, Michigan State a little bit. Maybe because it was a rivalry game, they didn't want to overlook their rivals and everything, because I thought Michigan would kind of look ahead to this game, and I thought they would probably lose last week, but either way, Michigan got the win either way. Looking at this matchup, though, Michigan, this is kind of the last chance for them. If they pull off a huge upset here, Michigan will not make it to the playoff or anything. They won't make it to the Big Ten championship, but this would probably be the biggest upset of the weekend because Oregon, they are definitely the more talented team here. I think the game plan for Michigan is going to definitely have to run the football in this game and wear down that clock and also, keep that Oregon offense off the field, because Oregon's going to try to score a lot of points in this game. But Michigan's got a pretty decent defense. I think they'll keep Oregon a little bit low score in the first half, but I don't really think Michigan will put up a fight in the second half. I think Oregon probably pulls away and shows us how really good they are. And I think the Ducks win this one. 28-17 is what I'm going to go with. And Michigan doesn't have a great offense, so I got to go with Oregon here in this one, 28-17. They win this one by 11. All right, next up we got in the Big 12, Texas Tech at Iowa State, 3:30 as well on ESPN. Cyclones favored by 13.5. Iowa State comes in undefeated. A couple weeks ago, they defeated UCF. That was a pretty close game for them. They're coming off of a bye week, so, Iowa State, we didn't really have much to talk about them from last weekend. Texas Tech, is a pretty solid 5-3 team, so you kind of expect a close game here because it's a Big 12 game, not just that, but we've seen Iowa State survive some close games. That's already happened, a few times, especially for both BYU and Iowa State. Both of those teams have, not to come back from behind. They've just been able to survive those games. And that was kind of similar, back in like the month of October when Iowa State took on UCF and then BYU took on Oklahoma State. So yeah, Iowa State coming out of the bye week, I think that kind of does help them out here. But I kind of expect Texas Tech here to put up a fight. I won't be really surprised if the Red Raiders mainly pulled off the upset here, but Got to go with the home field advantage in this one. I think both teams are pretty even. I'm going to go with the Cyclones, though. They have the home field advantage, and I think they win this one 30-27. So I don't think it's going to be a game where Iowa State will win by double digits. I don't really think that's going to happen because this is a Big 12 game, and any of these games can really go either way. But I got Iowa State winning 30-27. Next up, we got Florida and Georgia, 3:30 as well on ABC. This game, of course, going to be in Jacksonville. Bulldogs favored by 16.5. That's a very high spread there. I talked about it from yesterday. And looking at the over and under, it's at 52.5. Both of these teams coming out of bye weeks. We saw Georgia defeat Texas a couple weeks ago. That's the Georgia team that we're kind of expecting here going the rest of the way forward. They got it, their defense kind of figured out. They got some of those injured players that they had injured throughout the season back. So yeah, this Georgia defense is looking really dangerous going the rest of the way forward. The offense may not be as explosive as it was last year. We've seen Carson Beck has his struggles, but I think he'll be ready to go in this game. It's a rivalry game. Emotions will run high in this one. You got Florida, though, that's coming in at 4-3. This is not a bad Florida team. I think they're a lot better compared to the last couple years. They've been pretty solid. They've had a tough schedule, but they've beaten some of the teams on their schedule. For example, they beat Kentucky, a couple weeks ago, 48-20. They also beat Mississippi State. So, yeah, this Florida team, they're not really that bad. They've had some, really close losses this year. The Texas A&M game wasn't really that close, to be honest, and then you had the Tennessee game. That game, of course, went into overtime. They had a really big chance there to win that game, but yeah, Florida comes in. I think they'll definitely come out fired up. You got DJ Lagway, the quarterback, taking over for Graham Mertz here for the rest of the year. So yeah, we've seen Georgia's defense kind of struggle against dual-threat quarterbacks. Do we think, DJ Lagway can really use his legs in this game and really catch the Georgia defense off guard? I think he can, but I don't think it will be enough. Georgia probably wins this one here. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, though. I think Georgia wins this one, though, 37-21. So they do cover that 16-point spread, but, I got to go with Georgia here because Florida just not on the level of Georgia like they used to. And, it seems like when Florida and Georgia play, it seems like it's always close in the first quarter, but then by the second quarter and maybe this rest of the game, Georgia just pulls away from there. So I got to go with the Bulldogs here, 37-21. All right, next up, another SEC game, Texas A&M at South Carolina, 7:30 Eastern Time on ABC. The Aggies are favored by 2.5, and the over and under is at 44.5, so not expecting a lot of points to be scored in this game. You got Texas A&M ranked number 10 in the AP poll. They're coming off a win against LSU this past weekend, outscoring the Tigers 31-6 in that second half of that game from last weekend. Texas A&M is sitting at the top of the SEC. They have not lost a conference game. They're a one loss coming to Notre Dame back in week number 1. South Carolina, though, on the other hand, 4-3. They're pretty solid. They're not a bad 4-3 South Carolina team. They've, lost some close games this year, in my opinion. South Carolina had a bye week, so they've had time to really get ready for this one. Texas A&M is a pretty talented team, so you kind of expect South Carolina to put up a really big fight here. The quarterback position has been kind of a big struggle for South Carolina this year, but they're playing at night here in this one. It's in Columbia, one of the toughest places to play in the SEC, especially when it's at nighttime. This crowd will be really fired up. We went back to the LSU game, back in the month of September. That was a noon game, but, South Carolina fans were really fired up, and I think they'll be even more fired up in this game because they're taking on a one-loss top 10 Texas A&M team. Won't be surprised if we saw an upset here, but I got to go with Texas A&M. I think, with, Marcelo Reed at quarterback, depending on who they go with in this game, I think he'll make a difference here. I think Texas A&M probably forces a turnover at the end of the game, and that will probably seal the deal. So I got to go with Texas A&M in this one, 20-17. All right, next up, Louisville at Clemson, 7:30 Eastern Time on ESPN. Clemson favored by 10.5. And look at the over and under, 63.5. So we're kind of expecting a lot of points to be scored in this game. You got Clemson coming out of a bye week from this past weekend. They beat Virginia a couple weeks ago. This is a Clemson team that's gotten better and better since that Georgia loss back in Atlanta in week number 1. They're sitting there at 6-1, but you look at this Louisville team, they're pretty solid, a solid 5-3 team. I think this is kind of similar to the Iowa State and, Texas Tech game. You kind of expect Louisville to kind of put up a fight in this one, but this game is in Death Valley. If it was at Louisville, I'd probably give Louisville a chance here to possibly pull off the upset, but Clemson, playing in Death Valley at night, this is going to be a raucous crowd, and I just don't think Louisville has a chance in this one. I think it's probably close maybe for a while, but got to go with Clemson here. Maybe they pull away in the second half, and they win this one pretty big, 42-24. I don't really think Clemson can score that much points, but, Louisville, we've seen them have ups and downs a little bit. But, playing in Death Valley, this is going to be a very tough game here for this Louisville team. So I got to go with Clemson here, 42-24. Next up, we got another rivalry game here in the SEC, Kentucky at Tennessee. This one's going to be at 7:45 Eastern Time on the SEC Network. Tennessee's favored by 16.5, and the over and under is at 45.5. You got Tennessee a couple weeks ago that beat Alabama. They're coming in after a bye week from this past weekend, so Tennessee's kind of had some time to prepare here for this rivalry game against Kentucky. Tennessee has dominated the series for the last 3 years. The last time Kentucky won against Tennessee was in 2020, and they won that game, of course, in Knoxville. That was during the COVID season. You look at Kentucky, though, on the other side, it's kind of been a disappointing year for Kentucky. I'm a Kentucky fan, and I have to say this is like a very disappointing year, in my opinion, for my Kentucky Wildcats. They're 3-5. They're heading on the road in this one. I just don't really think this is going to be a close game here. I think Kentucky's season is pretty much over with, because if you look at the rest of the schedule for Kentucky, they got this game, and then they got to play Murray State, which that will be an easy game, but then they got to play Texas and Louisville on the schedule left as well. So if Kentucky don't win this game, they'll probably not make it to a bowl game, and they best could finish like 5-7 or 4-8. So yeah, this is definitely going to be a tricky one here for Kentucky. Like I said, I don't really expect a close game here. I think Tennessee dominates this one, and plus they're playing at home. They win this one 35-14. And Kentucky's offense has struggled this year. That's the reason why I only got them scoring 14 points, and the offensive line has continued to struggle as well. So I got to go with Tennessee in this one, 35-14. And then finally we got Pittsburgh at SMU at 8 o'clock Eastern Time on the ACC Network. SMU's favored by 7.5, and the over and under is at 58.5. Pittsburgh comes in undefeated. SMU 7-1, but undefeated in conference play. So both of these teams have no losses in conference play. So one of these teams is going to lose their first conference game this weekend. This is also a top 20 matchup. I think it's a pretty even matchup, to be honest. SMU might have a slight advantage because they're playing at home, but they do got some question marks on the offensive side of the football. They do have some injuries, so that may be a concern here for SMU. But you look at Pittsburgh. They played so well against Syracuse. I really don't think that was enough, though, for me to kind of figure out about Pittsburgh. Maybe this weekend we can kind of figure them out. If Pittsburgh wins this game, they'll definitely be for real. But if they don't, maybe it was kind of a fluke for them. But, SMU, I think I have to go with the home field advantage in this one. I think this is a really close game. It probably can go back and forth, but it's a low-scoring type game. Got to go with the Mustangs, though, because of home field advantage. And I think they win this one, 27-20 over the Pittsburgh Panthers. So those are my game picks and predictions heading into week number 10 of the 2024 college football season and heading into the first weekend of the month of November. Let me guys know what you think about my picks and predictions, and give me your picks and predictions on these 10 games of my own right here in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.